All right, welcome to Let's Accelerate Live. My name is Michael Nichols. I work in Bosch Innovation Consulting. And as you know, we talk a lot about doing innovation in a very structured way. And today we have a very special guest. We go way back in our conversations about corporate innovation, Dan Toma. But I'll let Dan Toma introduce himself because I think how he got into corporate innovation is an interesting story because not everybody has an appetite for this topic. So Dan, maybe introduce yourself and welcome.
Sure. Michael, thank you very much, first of all, for having me on the show. How I got into corporate innovation. Well, that's a good question. I would say more by chance than by design, if I will have to pick an answer. Essentially, I was working with startups. I had my own startup, working with other people's startup, working in accelerator programs, doing all the jazz around startup innovation, if you want. And at one point, I got headhunted by a major telco company in Europe to come and apply the same principles from the startup world in corporation. And I frankly hated the job 3 weeks in. However, I ended up staying for years because after 3 weeks, I went to the guy that headhunted me. He was a senior vice president with that particular company, and I was explaining my frustration with the way they were building products. The thing was backwards. They were starting from an Excel rather than try to understand the customer first, the problem first, and all that stuff. And he said, "Well, that's why I hired you. I hired you to fix this."
Yeah. Well, it's a good answer, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I said, okay, challenge accepted. I decided to stay with them for 3 years, and in that process, I actually co-authored the corporate startup, which was essentially uh, my way of documenting the changes. I believe, and we as a team of co-authors believed that companies should go for in order to be able to tap into the innovation potential of their employees, essentially. And that turned out quite well.
Interesting. So let me jump on that statement. You were 3 weeks in and you hated it. You worked in startups before, and then you came to corporate and sort of culture shock, right? And you were hit with something maybe you weren't prepared for. What are the differences from your perspective, since you've seen both worlds?
Well, there are many different things, right? The thing that shocked me the most was first of all how easy it was to get access to resources when we were inside. Very easy to scale. I mean, I was working for Europe's largest telecommunication company. And it was very easy to have an idea in one geography and scale it very fast throughout all the other 14, if you want, and even in the US, because they had a big presence in the US as well. Obviously, it was not that straightforward. Nobody gave you like a handbook on how to do it, but it was more about networking inside the company. But still, it was very possible and plausible if your idea was good enough to scale it very fast. And again, access to resources was pretty easy in terms of development, in terms of marketing budget, whatnot. The things that were shocking had to do more with the process of building something. And being a European company and being a large company in general, they were very biased towards where they were a process-led organization. Let's put it this way: the process was more important than the outcome, and following the process was more important than the outcome. And obviously, the process was a bit backwards, starting from the business case, starting from how big the market is going to be, how we're going to make money, and then do the development, and then launch it in the market and realize nobody has appetite for that. And that was exactly the opposite of what I was used to do in the startup world, where problem is first, customer is first.
Right. Well, let me ask you this question then. Since you said process in corporates, I think we all know that they love their processes. Is there, though, because you've consulted corporates afterwards, is there a way, though, to do innovation in a structured manner? And how would you think about it? I know I can show what we've done at Bosch, but maybe have your thoughts on this question first.
Sure. Again, the question about the process, the question about the framework is not a question of with an answer yes or no. It's not a question of 0 or 1. It's a spectrum. Right. It's a spectrum form. We don't have anything to we are process driven, meaning that we don't care about anything else but safeguarding and following the process. So it's a spectrum. If you are in either end, you are wrong. If you don't have a process, you're not going to see results. If you're too process heavy, you basically are not going to see results either, because you're just too focused on following the process. Obviously, everybody has their own let's say, framework. In corporate setup, we say, well, it's important to have a very clear strategy, and then you have to have a very clear methodology and practice for innovation, and then it's important to have a good innovation management system, and obviously culture and leadership have to support everything above.
Very good. I like your answer on spectrum, and the way we think about it, and I'd like to hear your thoughts, is in terms of maybe the way Charles O'Reilly, Michael Tushman frame it, in terms of explore versus exploit, or core versus beyond, however you want to frame that. It's that it's not that processes as such are bad. It's the misapplication in the wrong context, or the application of a core business process in an exploratory context. What do you think about that? Do you think about it in terms of ambidexterity, or you're not as religious about it?
No, I'm not really dogmatic about it. I'm thinking more along the lines of, these are all tools, and like with every tools that we have in a toolbox, I'm thinking here about the physical toolbox, right? The one that you have in your shed at home. Essentially, every tool is good for a certain purpose. If the purpose changes, you need to change the tool. Nobody can come in and say the hammer is the best tool ever. Actually, it's not. You cannot screw something with a hammer, right? So if you need to screw something, the hammer is probably the poorest of choices in that toolbox. I'm thinking more in terms of, as I said, tools that are fit for purpose, processes that are fit for purpose. Just adopting something from the explore purpose to the exploit purpose is going to be equally harmful as the vice versa.
And vice versa, right? I always say, you probably don't want to do fail fast, fail cheaply with a nuclear power plant, right? So there would be a misapplication.
Aircraft carrier, or with an airplane, or with a train,
or Bosch, right? Or with a safety critical system for an automobile, right? And it's just, I think the main point, as you put it, is to think about that context. Now, I'll just show the way we approach it at Bosch, what we've worked out over time. As you rightly pointed out, let's start with strategy. And I think probably what's been new for corporate recently is not just jump directly to the Excel and to a technology. Even if you have capabilities, think about what is the actual problem we're solving. But that already goes back to strategic framing. And like you said, I think these sorts of processes you see are probably commoditized at this point. Everybody has such a framework. How they live it out maybe is different. What are some of the problems that you see in corporate innovation?
There are many problems.
Let's start. Yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead. You want to say something?
I want to jump in. So one of the things we worked with our partners at ChangeLogic, Charles O'Reilly, Andrew Benz, Michael Tushman, is the following. Now, I know you said there are many problems, but we thought about it in terms of there are three major points where things go wrong. Maybe let's start with strategy, and then we'll have a discussion around that. So one of the thoughts around strategy is a lot of times in corporate, it's very vague. It's very high level, maybe buzzwordy. And then the consequence of that is something like the following. You generate lots of projects underneath a vague term, but they don't necessarily fit with your company. They don't leverage capabilities, and you end up with chaos. So what would you say about that? What have you seen there?
Well, I've seen exactly what you just described, right? Sometimes the innovation strategy of most companies boils down to terms such as IoT, or beyond the pill, or continuous maintenance, or stuff like this, right? Which can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. I'm not saying that we should disregard completely the topic. I think it's important for every project to be aligned with a certain topic, but strategy should be a clear list of options to pursue, right? People need to know exactly what problem spaces they are allowed to tackle, what kind of business models they are allowed to develop on top of a validated problem. And then later on, it's about technology. I actually wrote extensively about the concept of innovation thesis. Starting obviously from the corporate startup, I've developed the concept as we were applying it with our clients. And if you look for our blog posts, you can find there examples of how a thesis should look like. And essentially, we emphasize the idea of having two parts: a thesis and an antithesis, because it's equally important to
Right.
know what you don't want to do, right? And actually,
Right.
we encourage companies to start with, tell us what you don't want to do first, because once you're very clear about what you don't want to do, understanding what you want to do becomes a bit easier to at least formulate.
And
And then
that's probably the biggest problem with being so vague, is it's not clear what you won't do. But what are some good reasons not to do something? Maybe let's start there.
there's a lot of reasons. And actually, this morning I left a comment on LinkedIn when we were marketing this event. I think that some of the reasons for not wanting to do something is, first of all, you are not suited as a company to do it. You cannot pursue something because of internal politics, because of your technology infrastructure, because of your overall strategic goal, because of, I don't know, macroeconomic circumstances, political circumstances, God knows what, right? That can be one.
Right.
The other reason might be that it's not a good time for you to pursue something. Maybe the thing you
Mm-hmm.
want to pursue is too early on in terms of the development of the technology or understanding of a certain problem. So maybe it's not right to even consider going in there. Or if you want to go in there, what will be the vehicles you can use as a company to understand if that's something you want to pursue later on.
Yeah.
A lot of companies I'm seeing using venturing and partnerships with startups in order to validate if a certain strategic option is viable for them in the short term. So it's a question of, do we have the capability, and is it the right time for us to do it? And
Mm-hmm.
obviously, there's an entire train of thought underneath with respect to how do you actually do this. What's the methodology, if you want, for discovering if a certain space is interesting for you as a strategic option or not. Obviously, there could be other reasons why you should not pursue something.
Yeah, yeah. So what would a good innovation thesis sound like? Obviously, you said IoT is not one. So what would it sound like?
Um, obviously it depends from company to company, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's very difficult to say what it will sound like. What I can tell you is how it should look like. First of all, if it's longer than 3 pages, you are probably doing it wrong. If
Mm-hmm.
it's shorter than 3 pages, then it's too vague. Um, uh, I would not use PowerPoint. I would just keep it in Word, black, white, right?
Mm-hmm.
Black letters on a white piece of paper. Um, I would keep it to 3 pages. First page, a statement. In general, we believe that the world is changing and we want to take part in that change, and we are committed to growth. We hope, very important in that part, to put exactly how much you're hoping for innovation to contribute in the overall growth of the company. We hope that innovation will contribute to our top line growth 5% over the next 5 years, or I don't know, even a certain amount. We hope that through innovation we're going to get 100 million, so on and so forth. And then pages 2 and 3 are the antithesis and the thesis. Antithesis meaning specifically the things we're not going to do, and thesis is the things we are going to do. And
Mm-hmm.
under the thesis and the antithesis, you have 3 subchapters: problem spaces, business models, and technologies. Why this? Because it follows the normal product life cycle, right? That startups are very good at following, and now I'm seeing a lot of corporations, including yourselves, adopting product life cycle thinking or methodologies, right? You start with, what is the problem we're trying to solve? What business model can we put on top of it? What technologies do we use in order to enable that business model? And in that if you have a thesis that looks like this, then first of all, it's very clear what people are allowed to explore and what they're not allowed to explore, what they're allowed to develop, what they're not allowed to develop.
Right.
But the other benefit is that then the thesis becomes a document that people can go back to every single time they have to take a decision, or if they are managers and if they are in the innovation team, this is a reference document. They know what they're allowed to do, what they're not allowed to do. Specifically, I'm going to give an example now from banking. We worked with a bank in a certain geography, developing their thesis. They had very clear problem spaces. Teams were very clear about what they were allowed to do. Teams went there and they uncovered problems in those problem spaces, validated the problem. As they progressed in the product lifecycle, they had to present a business model for those problem spaces. And one of the things that was listed in the anti-thesis was something along the lines of, we're not going to support business models that that require the customer to come physically into a branch, into an agency to sign something. Why?
Right.
Because the overall corporate strategy of that particular bank is to shut down the agencies in a certain geographical part of the country. And they know that they knew that they would have no branches there in the coming 3-5 years. And this is why they were forcing every single new product team to think of business models that don't require the physical presence of the client in the agency, in branch, to sign papers and whatnot. So again, the company was very, very specific with respect to what kind of business models they were expecting from the employees and what kind of business model they were willing to support. And obviously, the same thesis was handed off to the partnership department. They were scouting for startups that fitted that particular, those problem spaces with those business models, with those technologies.
Very good.
Hopefully,
So,
this made sense.
No, it makes total sense. And I'm a big fan of innovation theses, and particularly saying what you're not going to do, because that really helps you avoid this innovation zoo, or at least it's an attempt to avoid the innovation zoo. Maybe you can't totally prevent submarine projects popping up, but at least people can't claim that they don't know what you're doing. I know you used the case of the bank that that you were talking about. Can you name a company out there, maybe a popular company that you think maybe does this well, that doesn't really have an innovation zoo, but they're really crystal clear on what they're going to do and why not other things?
I'm not really sure I'm allowed to name them to give out names.
Well, maybe not one of your clients, maybe someone that you admire out there.
I think it's interesting to look at what Telefonica and DuPont are doing. I think they're probably one of the front runners, if you want, in the innovation game. Big fan of Telefonica, never our clients. So if I talk nice about them, I talk nice about them because I actually genuinely like what they do. Same goes for DuPont. I think in the case of DuPont, they are very good at managing and measuring portfolio, and not just the innovation portfolio, but their overall portfolio. They wrote about it. I think they're like thought leadership level when it comes to managing and measuring portfolio.
Very good. Let me bring up a comment from the LinkedIn, one of the LinkedIn people listening in. We've been talking a lot about innovation, and I think you and I know what we mean by the word innovation. And we're talking about innovation zoo. We talked about spectrum. So I'd like to use this comment to think about that. What is innovation in your eyes? I know it's a broad question. You can take it wherever you want. And then what is the difference between that and maybe invention, which people often confuse?
Right. It's a classical. I've seen this debate. Before. Obviously, every company should have their own definition of innovation, and Bosch should not copy the homework from Siemens, and Siemens should not copy the homework from Toyota, and so on and so forth. I think every company should develop their own definition, and it's very important to have a clear definition because you want people to get behind it, you want people to support it, and I think it's a good exercise to do within a company to come up with a very clear definition of innovation. If your company doesn't have it, Michael, or if we have people here in the audience that that think that their companies don't have one, I would urge them to do it as soon as possible. This is not just for PR. This is not just for winning hearts and minds. This actually helps because you want to align, in particular, the senior team behind what innovation is. Because if you go into a senior team, if you go into a board meeting, and I've been in some where some people talked about innovation and referred to it as being something around digitizing the core, and some people talked about innovation and what they actually meant was essentially flying cars. And they were not talking about flying cars, but new business models, new stuff,
New tech,
really
new things,
cool,
you know?
new tech, right? And the thing is that they were both right. But what was important? Was important for the group to come together and develop something for their need, and everybody get behind it and say, this is our definition of what innovation is. This is our definition of what digital transformation is. And because we have this definition, we know that we're going to use these processes, these tools, these metrics to measure, for example, the progress. My personal definition is something new with sustainable business model behind it. And I think we've put forward the same definition in the corporate startup. I haven't changed my definition since. The only thing that I changed is my approach, saying that, well, this is just our definition. We encourage everybody to have their own. The distinction between innovation and invention is that invention is just something new. Like I'm inventing a new material. I'm inventing a new composite. I'm inventing a new molecule. So if that particular molecule doesn't find its way into a drug that can potentially save lives or improve the health of a certain group, and then we can sell that to either that group or through the insurance companies or through hospitals or whatever, it's just going to stay in the molecule stage in the lab, and we're going to write a nice paper about it with absolutely zero impact on the patient or on the world itself.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think people underestimate vocabulary because that somehow makes everybody clear. When we get to portfolio, I think it becomes even more crucial that you understand yourself what you mean by innovation, invention, and other things. I don't know if you've read the book by Matt Ridley about how innovation works, but he makes exactly that kind of distinction where invention is something new to the world, maybe more on the technology side. But those technologies often never go to market. And so he points out that particularly innovation in his mind is this go-to-market piece with a business model, right? And that's often not the inventor. It's often somebody else, and it's often very random how it happens. But that discounts probably the other part that we talked about and you mentioned is architectural improvements to the existing business, maybe digitizing the core. Also very good. And I think it's important that the listeners don't get the impression that we think one is better than the other. I think we've already said that they're all necessary.
Totally.
But know the difference between them and know when you're doing which and why, right? I think that would be the critical part. And
adapt your processes and your, most importantly, the indicators for success. It's very important to adapt those because in a digital transformation project, the measures for success are totally different than the ones in an innovation project. Why? Because in a digital transformation project, you already know that the customer has that particular problem. However, what you're changing now, you're probably changing the channel. The interaction with the customer now is no longer, let's say, at your head office, or in the case of the bank, right? It's no longer at the branch. It's now happening via an app or through the desktop or through the iPad, whatever. The problem is already validated. We know people want to take credit. We know that people have mortgages. Like that's solved. That's solved. We don't have to spend time, validating that. So there's no point in measuring that. As I said, digital transformation projects are totally different in terms of indicators than innovation project. It's very important to adapt because otherwise you might be disappointed with what you're seeing in front of you.
Right. I want to jump on to let's move to the next part where we're talking about maybe creating a new business model. We have a problem statement. we're not sure if we've hit it correctly. Maybe we need to do some more customer research, customer discovery in terms of like lean startup. We're going to check if we can build a business model very quickly. You said something interesting, though. You said that you were shocked when you came to corporate because you have literally everything a startup would dream of. You got people, you got money, you got resources beyond your wildest dreams. What I find, though, in corporate is you have it, but it's really not easy to access, right? Because of these processes you have. And it's kind of ironic that corporates have lots of money and they dump it a lot of times the opposite as you would in the wild. They dump it early, maybe in ideation, create a technology or an organization, and they invest before they've learned what they're going to do. I don't know. Maybe you disagree with that statement. What have been your observations around that? Yeah.
No, I fully agree. And again, this goes this is rooted essentially in the way managers have been trained and formed. We need to be honest with ourselves. Nobody that is sitting now on a board in a listed company anywhere in the world has had any formal entrepreneurial education.
Right.
None. And if people here on the audience believe differently, please let me know who are the people that are sitting on those boards that had formal entrepreneurial education. Formal entrepreneurial education. I'm not talking about, oh, they had their own startups. That's great. That's hands-on. That's really good experience. I'm not saying that hands-on experience is less relevant than the formal one. On the contrary, I believe in hands-on experience, right? But we should never neglect the importance of formal education. And most of the managers, again, I'm not even talking about senior leadership now, I'm talking about even middle managers. None of them actually had formal education.
I'm glad you say that because you hear often in corporate, oh, that's just theory. But there's a reason that universities, they come to these theories. It's because they've interacted with so many corporations. They have so much data at their hands. Yeah. And these theoretical constructs can really help you start making sense of the world. And I want to back you on this. I think Americans love to say, you know, when a company is no longer innovative, it's when they start hiring MBAs or Harvard MBAs. And I have an MBA. So, and I think the key word, right, in the MBA is administration. And that's literally what you're hired to do, is administer an existing system, squeeze cash, squeeze efficiency, productivity, these things out of an existing system. But never in my MBA, aside from maybe a few sidebars, did we talk about what if there's not an answer? How do you discover who the customer is, and how do you do these experiments? Because in the case study method, the answer is there. You just have to find it, right? Yeah, so yeah. I'm glad you came to that. And it's totally true. And it's nobody's fault in that core business. It's just that we weren't trained to do that. We didn't have that education. And when you go into the core business, you're also not expected to do those things.
Yeah, exactly.
Until you are.
And again, we're not trying to downplay this kind of education that people got. There is a reason why they're there, and they're superb at what they do, and they're needed 100%, right? We're just saying that in the case of trying to grow beyond the core, those skills are more of a liability than an asset. Let's put it this way. You're going to do more damage if you come with your MBA thinking to managing innovation than if you had no MBA at all. To be honest with you, because and again, I have an MBA, top university.
First question would be something like the following: Dan, how you have a startup idea? What's your five-year revenue plan? What's your EBIT this year? Yeah, exactly. That's what we're trained to do, right? What verticals are you in? Yeah,
exactly. What verticals are you in? Yeah. Let me give you a lot of money up front, rather than the startup world, where first of all you have an idea, and even before you speak with your significant other about it, you should probably do a landing page and see if there is interest, or
someone besides your significant other, right?
That might like exactly. Go and hang out with somebody and ask a couple of questions about it before you actually go and talk with your wife about it. And again, totally different mindset.
So let's talk about this mindset. Let's talk about how do you learn before you invest? How would you go about it? Maybe from your startup experience, maybe from the formal education out there. There are the people who push lean startup. There's sort of design thinking running around out there, agile methodologies. Without being too religious about anyone, maybe how do you recommend going about it when you have a problem statement and you want to test a business model? How do you go out there and do it?
Well, obviously, you need to start with what's the problem you're trying to solve, who are you to solve it for, and try to understand if those people actually exist, if that problem actually exists. I would encourage you to, if you come with positives in both of these questions, I would then encourage you to think about how big is that problem,
Mm-hmm.
and not just in terms of how big is the pain for the customer, because through marketing you can create need,
And
but
awareness, yeah.
essentially how big is the world that you're trying to go into? Is this problem a problem that is with I don't know, 1,000 people, or does this problem sit with 1,000, I don't know, a million people, or 10 million people, or 100 million people, right? How big is the problem? And after you understood how big the problem is, and if that particular problem is big enough to your appetite, right? There's no clear answer here, right? It can be 1,000 people, it can be one person, it can be 10, it can be 100 million. It's going to be up to you. Think about what is the business model you're going to put on top.
And your investor, of course, right? So in a
Obviously,
corporate, you're either looking for millions or 5, 6 major customers, right?
exactly. It depends on the market, right? I mean, if you look at aircraft manufacturing, and let's pick another
Right.
niche, aircraft interior manufacturing. There's 4 companies in the world that do that. If you
Mm-hmm.
have solved a problem for one, and they confirm that
It's
that's a
good
problem,
business.
and their money in hand, you already own 25% of the market.
And you own it for a long time in that business because the
And
business
you own
model
it,
locks you in.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. So it's going to be very easy for you to go to the company across the street. Again, it's an industry of four players or 5 players max. Again, I'm not an expert in that, but at one point we worked with a company in that space, and I remember, no, they told us, I was shocked. So yeah, essentially, if you found a problem with one, it's very easy to scale to the other 4. So again,
Correct.
there is no particular or specific answer to how big the market should be. It should be big enough to support the business model you have in mind, and it should be big enough to support your vision for what you want to build, who you want to be, all these things.
And somehow you're already thinking about the scaling story at problem discovery, right? Are there
Yeah.
enough of these that we could scale out? And that's what that's all about.
This
Okay,
this,
so
this is why when analyzing, for example, a portfolio of a company, we do that through auditing. When we audit the portfolio, the innovation funnel specifically of a company, one of the lenses that we use to analyze the portfolio through is total addressable market. So how many projects you
yeah,
have in the funnel that are addressing markets of over 100 million, 50 to 100, less than 50, whatever. We discuss with the client, and we set up these boundaries. But it's very important for an executive team, a board, to understand, okay, we're investing so much in innovation, what can we expect? Where are we playing? Is this
yeah.
tempting enough to continue investing? Maybe we
And
should
what's
defund.
our gap, right? What's our gap going
Exactly.
into the future, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Maybe it makes sense to defund some of the teams that are playing in lower markets, and double down on the ones that are playing in the most profitable or biggest markets, not most profitable, but biggest markets, and then take a leadership decision there based also on other indicators around, let's say, how viable the idea is, how far along in the product lifecycle the team is, the evidence they've uncovered, so on and so forth.
Yeah, very. And I think we're onto something that makes this type of innovation uncomfortable for people in corporate or have MBAs like you and I, is that it's not an Excel sheet. It's not desktop research. This is get your hands in the dirt, go out and talk to real people. And that can be very unsettling, uncomfortable. And it's qualitative. And this is something I find interesting often in a corporate environment. There's a heavy bias towards quantitative, but at the expense, in this case, of qualitative, right?
If you like quantitative that much, that's fine. I'm talking to a person that likes that. Don't worry, it will come in the product life cycle. Exactly. It will come. Yes. It's not going to be the first thing, but trust me, 1 month down the line, if you are committed to the idea, you should only take decision based on quantitative data, right? We talked about the example, like go speak with 5 people. Yeah, you spoke with 5 people, but that's not an indication of how big the world is. After you've spoken with 5 people and everybody confirmed the problem, go and set up a landing page, do an ads experiment, see how many people click, send it out to 100,000 people on LinkedIn and see if anybody clicks. And if they click, well, here's your quantitative data.
And the way I think about it is so I studied finance in my MBA, obviously. I love finance, probably like you. And you build your nice cash inflows, cash outflows, you get your net present value and all that. And that works pretty well when you know all the inputs. And I think of this discovery phase as discovering the inputs and my confidence around those inputs. So we're actually, during this phase, we're building that net present value calculation. We're just building the inputs, but it takes a lot of qualitative work to get there. So let's summarize where we are. You left the building, you talked to customers, you think you found a problem that's big enough to be worth you solving. What's next?
Well, as I said, next should be quantitative research. Try to see if the problem is present in people that are beyond your reach, beyond your geography, beyond your house, beyond your office, beyond your city. And see if the problem statement still holds water.
Understood.
And then see what happens if you come back with, oh yeah, apparently this problem is something that people also suffer from in this other country or in this other county.
So good, very good. So you've validated, you've supplemented your interviews with maybe some good quantitative research, using whatever the best techniques are in marketing these days, and then you say you come back and it's a go. Where do we go now? Am I done?
Build a. No, you're never done. You're done when you have an IPO. You're done when you have an IPO. The next thing would obviously be to put together a business model. Like, okay, we identified the problem. Now, how can we make money off this problem?
Good. So let me stop you, because I think a lot of people don't know what business model means. They have something like revenue model in their head. How do you think about a business model before we go into how you validate one?
I'm not going to be dogmatic and follow a certain framework, right? There's so many out there. I'm thinking about what are the mechanics of your business? What are the mechanics of the logic behind you solving that particular problem for that customer segment while being profitable? Again, while being profitable, because it's very easy to sell $1 bills for 50 cents.
Actually, one of my
poverty.
one of my favorite definitions of a business model is, the author wrote it. It's how do you tell the story of your business, and it's that logic, that narrative from the customer problem to how you solve it to how you monetize it. Because we're not creating a charity. That's another kind of narrative. We can't just create value, we also have to capture it somehow. Okay, so let's say, how do you do experiments around the business model? How do you recommend doing that?
Well, it really depends what you need to experiment on, right? It really boils down to you prioritizing the biggest risk in that particular business model. Again, it varies from business model to business model. I've seen business models where the biggest risk was around channel. Will people accept this particular digital channel as the default one? I've seen business models that had a lot of risk around the supply chain. Right? Can we find a supplier that's able to provide us with the needed materials at this cost?
So correct me if I'm hearing you correctly. I think the implication of what you're saying is, look at the business model you want to validate, prioritize the risks in terms of, for this business model, if this is not true, we're dead.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where you start. Is that the way you're thinking about it?
Yeah.
Okay,
Exactly.
very good.
Exactly.
Okay.
And again, for every single business model, the risk sits in a different place. Is that
Yeah.
I've seen startups, I've seen corporate teams where the biggest risk was the technology risk. Can we actually build it?
Yes.
I've seen startups, I've seen corporates that had a risk around supply chain. Can we actually find somebody somewhere in this big round world of ours that's
We'll
able
sell it.
to
Even reach them.
no, talking about supply chain, like to provide us with this raw material at this price.
Or with a component, yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
or with a certain component for
Yeah,
the thing that
and
we're trying to build.
I was going with channels because we often see that's often underestimated. Just because you found somebody with a problem and you can even solve it doesn't mean you even have access. And that's very difficult actually to get in a cheap way. That's why I think you see all this work around partnerships these days, thinking about that startups want access to corporate channels and vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say I don't want to go too deeply into maybe lean startup or any of these sorts of approaches to doing MVPs. I think I'd rather focus on the quantitative side because I think I want to get into the metrics and the portfolio aspects. Let's start with the individual project. You said eventually we're going to get quantitative. And I get this question a lot, and I'm sure you do too. What are the metrics or the KPIs you would measure one of these exploratory bets by? Just one project. Let's start with one project.
Again, it really depends now on how mature the project is. If we're talking about early stage, I'm looking at their learning velocity, essentially how fast they're learning in unit of time. Guys, you had this idea, great, it's aligned with our strategy. Michael, as a manager, allows you to go explore it. And we're going to check in with you next week or in 3 weeks, but no more than 3 weeks. I'm seeing a lot of corporates that give people a runway for exploration, something like 3 months or 6 months, and they only check in with the teams after 3 months. I was like, God, these people get like a ticket, like a free ticket for 3 months. Like, wow, I wish I had that, right? And I know probably 10 entrepreneurs that wish they had that. No, but let's go back to the case. Michael, as a manager, agrees. Yes, we're on the right track with the problem statement, aligned with strategy. Go and explore. We're going to check in with you in 2 weeks. When we check in with them in 2 weeks, I would be very interested to see how much they have learned, and divide that by time. Essentially, how many learnings per week, and also by cost, like were they cost effective in their learning? Because it's right, we can experiment a lot, but putting a rocket on Mars, that's probably not the best experiment you can do, and probably definitely not the most cost effective one. So look at those two indicators very early stage. Now, as the teams progress, as they get more mature, as they learn more, obviously those metrics have to revolve around growth. You're looking at customer acquisition cost, customer lifetime value, churn or attrition rates, various business model specific indicators that point to a very clear answer around, will this be sustainable in the long run? Will this idea have a sustainable business model in the long run? And again, it varies heavily from business model to business model. If you're a one-time purchase versus if you're a subscription, if you're a freemium versus if you're a user-generated content, whatever.
So yeah, it's a project business model specific metric, and I think this is something that MBAs like you and I would struggle with if we just came straight out of the MBA. Is wait, the only thing I need to look at is MPV or some one metric that matters for every project. The hammer you mentioned, I'm going to hit every project with the same hammer, but that turns out to be the wrong way to manage these early stage exploratory ventures, right? And that was something I had to learn coming out. That it's a hard learning. It's frustrating. It's actually time consuming because you have to think deeply about each business model in your funnel. And funnel's the key word because Probably have like 15 minutes left. So I want to get into this part because I think this is where you're passionate these days, and you're even writing a book. Maybe tell us the name of the book, and that'll get us into this funnel.
Yeah, you're talking probably about innovation accounting, right?
Correct.
Yeah, we're done writing. I've actually seen yesterday or 2 days ago the first print. They have like a small prototype that they showed us. They sent us a couple of pictures about it.
Good. So I think what we've been discussing though is we set up a strategy, right? We say the things we're going to do and we're not going to do, the reasons why. Okay. We start placing some bets. We talked about how do I measure an individual bet, going from the problem statement to can we build a business model? Can we build the thing that delivers the value, the technical feasibility? And that was at the individual project level. Now let's look at the whole funnel. How do you, and you get this question a lot probably, and I've heard it often, and I struggle to think about it myself. How do you set up an innovation portfolio consisting of core, maybe something like digitizing the core, placing a few bets around the edges, and maybe, I don't know, 1 or 2 moonshots, although those are likely to fail. How do you think about that? How do you think about constructing this funnel? The reason I ask that is because you can't fund all of these projects. That you might, any given corporation can only fund 1 or 2 scale-ups maximum at a time, without destroying the company. So how do you think about that?
Well, there are many lenses through which you can look at your funnel and start taking decisions. One of them, I think we just covered earlier when we discussed about the total addressable market. If you only want to fund projects that are in markets worth 100 million plus, that's a lens through which you can look at the portfolio and start taking decision. Another lens I would encourage you to look at is the risk-adjusted value to cost ratio. What do I mean by risk-adjusted? Everybody knows how to compute a value to cost ratio. Essentially, how much will this bring us, divide that by how much it will cost us to run it and plus develop it, and then we have a return rate. That's a 1.5x to a 40x if you're dealing with a unicorn. Discounted value to cost ratio, risk-adjusted value to cost ratio means that you are multiplying the actual value to cost that you've computed by the inherent risk, the probability, the confidence that you have in that number being correct. And that
was actually that was the first thing that popped in my mind when you said 100 million euro-dollar opportunity. I thought, well, what's the probability of getting that? How many bets do I need to place so that I have a chance of actually getting the 1.5, 1.6 that I'm looking at? Because the probability, I don't know what you think the probability is. I don't know it. I think we're guessing there. So how do you, is that kind of what you're thinking too when you're talking about this risk adjusted?
I'm talking about risk adjusted, as I said. Look at the team that you have in front of you. Look at the account you're analyzing, and see how much evidence is still needed in that particular bet for it to be what it promises to be. Right? I can tell you, Michael, I'm setting up a new space travel agency, and we're going to sell tickets for holidays to Mars. And this is going to be amazingly profitable, right? And you come in and say, yeah, Dan, but you don't have a rocket. You don't have a contract with SpaceX. You don't even have a base on Mars, right? So you are going to discount my idea by probably 100% by the time you're done interviewing me, right? If I would come in and say, hey, Michael, same idea, but I've just had lunch with Elon Musk this afternoon, and he said that he's going to give us space tax to send people to Mars. All of a sudden, you are not going to discount my value to cost by 100%, but probably you're going to discount it by 50%, because guess what? We don't have a hotel on Mars.
Right. So this is interesting when you combine it with your learning velocity, because what it suggests is as I learn, that discount rate changes.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And
It might get worse, by the way.
it might get worse. It might get worse.
Yeah.
It might get worse. We actually in the corporate startup, we actually have a graph for that where you start think about it like this. You start very high in terms of your potential, but you have
Mhm.
very
Low chance of
high
getting it, right?
risk, right?
Yeah.
0% chance of getting it with a very high valuation. And as you move, you can either go like this, right? Because your valuation drops as evidence comes in, or you might stay at that level. And then all of a sudden you're talking about having a unicorn, because guess what? The valuation hasn't changed, although there was more evidence coming in.
So Dan, so how did you come to this thinking? Like you said, you had an MBA. Where did you come up with all this stuff? I think what's interesting, if I listen to you, I've had a similar path, and I think about it very similarly to you. But it's almost been through being an autodidact, right? Teaching myself, observation. So how did you come to all this thinking that you have
I
now?
think in the same way. I'm an engineer by trade, and again, the MBA was something I've done after my engineering school. Um, Again, I think trial and error, I would say, for some bits, and also connecting stuff that's already out there. Look at
Mm-hmm.
VCs; they have a lot of these things figured out. It's not
Yeah, of
fully
course.
polished. It's not fully
Yeah,
polished. They have their own, like, they make their own mistakes. I'm just improving on that, and adopting it for the context in which we're playing. I don't know if I'm with a certain client, adopt it to their context.
understood. We're coming to the end, and something that's always been curious for me about people like you, or maybe even myself in this context, is what motivates you to keep doing this. You said when you first entered corporate, you were done after 2 weeks, and yet you're still here. So what is your end game? What is your ambition with all of this? It can't be
Um,
money. It can't be money. There are better ways to make money, Dan. So what is it that motivates you?
I just had lunch with a friend a couple of days ago, and I told him, "Man, I'm doing it for the money." It's like, well, if I give you all the money, something's telling me that you're still going to do this, and
Yeah.
and I guess he was right. No, I don't. What motivates me? I don't know. I think it's an interesting problem to solve. I think that what draws me to this is the fact that it's purely uncharted territory. When we wrote the innovation accounting book, there were very few books out there that we could actually use for reference. A lot of the things that we've put in the book were things that we have tried ourselves and failed and learned
Yeah.
from, and things that we actually applied and they worked. And again, I think the bit about being a very geeky thing to do attracts me. It's like it's an uncharted area of management at the moment, and I like the challenge. I think
Mm-hmm.
most
Mm-hmm.
most than anything else.
What do you think?
I used to like traveling, but now that's gone.
Well, not by choice. So,
Not by choice, yes, by design.
so you wrote a book, corporate startup. Now you're writing about innovation accounting, which I think makes sense with the way you're thinking about things: probabilities, risk, learning, building up that net present value calculation, then running a portfolio on top to match the corporate strategy. What's your next book? What do you think your next book would be about, if you have any energy
Uh,
left?
I don't know. I mean, to be honest with you, I already started thinking about it probably a couple of weeks ago. Um, might be something around how can you actually transform an organization to apply the other previous two books. Because one thing is to have the ideas,
Yeah.
to have the concepts, to have all these nice graphs, and it's a totally different ball game trying to apply it, to sell it to an executive, to convince somebody that that's the right path, and so on and so
So
forth.
after I read your third book, then these will all be green. You'll know how to do this, and I think that's what
Hopefully.
makes it. I think that's what makes it so fascinating. Is you got the strategic side. That's already hard. I mean, we know that it's hard to craft a good strategy in general.
Yeah.
Um, this part, doing the validation of innovation projects, I think people are getting better there. This part, the reintegration is another monster. We didn't even really talk about that. Can you even reintegrate the thing that you're creating as you validate it? That's a lot of organizational behavior involved. And I think that's probably what you're referring to. So maybe that's probably an entire.
Do you have to? My question is, do you have to
Good.
reintegrate? Maybe the company of the future. It's something I've been toying around with in my head for at least 2 years. Maybe the company of the future is going to be a company of companies. Maybe the company of the future is going to look more like a VC, like an investment fund, than like a monolithic, large engineering Southern German company, which I don't want to name.
I've thought about that, and the MBA in me would go back and say something like the following to your thought. I'd say, well, if it's not going back into the core, why wouldn't I just leave that money with the shareholders and they can make their own investments? That's my initial skepticism to your thought. But I have the same thought, like spinoffs. That's what everybody's preaching these days, spinoffs. But there's always the question, why would you do that? No, go ahead.
My question back to you would be, why do investment funds exist? Why do VC funds exist? Right? It's the same logic, right?
Yeah.
Why would you want to invest into a VC fund when you can have that 100,000 or 1 million that you can do whatever you want with it? Well,
it's a very good point, right? It's a good point, because I think in innovation we get into this paradox of their existing corporate capabilities, but we want to innovate. And then we tell a story like the following. If you want to innovate, you must use those capabilities and you must reintegrate. But that's a paradox. It's almost a contradiction, right? Because you're probably restricting your innovation capabilities by having that. Why couldn't you add a new capability? Why couldn't you have another business unit? Exactly as you said. Why couldn't you spin out, rebuy? I mean, there are all kinds of things maybe we could think about differently if we open up this box. So I would be looking forward to this book from you. To see what you have to say about that. I think we're at the end, though. I just wanted to thank you for this conversation. I always enjoy talking to you. The reason I invited you, we've had several of these conversations in the past, and I thought it might be interesting for people to hear us talk. Maybe not. Maybe it's not interesting at all. Maybe we're the crazy ones. But thank you for coming on. It's very interesting as always.
Thank you very much for having me. Hopefully it was useful.
Yeah, that's been Let's Accelerate. Thank you, and bye-bye.